Okay, we are live on an absolutely beautiful Thursday afternoon for our sixth class in our series on sexual alchemy. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. And as I shared in my post yesterday, this is the very final class on our series on sexual alchemy, and today we're going to be exploring the theme of why sexual healing is needed for leaders, right? So we're essentially just exploring the significance of this sexual healing work for leaders. And yeah, it's such a joy to have you all here and such an honor to be holding conversation for this work and to be holding space for us to explore this very important theme in our healing journeys as leaders and as a work that we are actually deeply called to. So today we're going to be exploring why as leaders we're called to that work, all right? And for those who are joining us for the first time, my name is Dimelo Mareri and I am a spiritual healer. I'm a womb medicine woman, and I am a leadership guide based in Botswana. Hi, Nonofang. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So let's dive into it. And at any point during our conversation, please definitely feel free to share any thoughts, any questions that you might have on this theme that we're exploring today, and also on the series that we're concluding today, maybe on the past 5 classes that we have had thus far. And I also just want to share that all these classes are also available on my podcast. And so if you might prefer to listen, there's that opportunity as well. I'll be sharing on those in the coming week or in the coming days. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Yeah, it's definitely so beautiful. And feels quite delicious, yeah, to be here at class 6 of the series, and also just having done this deep dive, that we have done, where we started by exploring the fact of the sexual healing work being a womb healing work and so much more. and then exploring the nature of the sexual wound, which is actually what we are seeking to heal, with the sexual healing work. So we did 3 classes on that. We have a part 1, part 2, part 3 of just deeply exploring what the sexual wound is and how to heal it. So if you're joining us for the first time today, definitely check that out. And last week we explored why sexual healing work is for everyone, which was such a juicy conversation to get into as well. And today we're exploring the significance of sexual healing specifically for leaders. So let's get into it, shall we? Let me know if there might be any specific thing that you're hoping to learn from this conversation, if there might be any specific questions that you have, specifically around sexual healing and leadership and you being in your sacred mission as a leader, Yeah. So just at the beginning, there is the invitation for us to consider the forms of leadership that we have been initiated into, all right? And to also consider this idea, it's actually a distorted idea around leadership, that leadership can or is a lonely endeavor, right? Or that leaders are to end up alone or in unfulfilling relationships. So this is definitely not everyone, but I have seen it as a prevailing distorted idea within the template of our leadership, right? And this speaks to our experience of intimacy and our experience of ourselves as sexual beings and the experience of our sexual energy, all right? And so coupled with intimacy healing work, so there's an invitation for us to come into this work of sexual healing specifically for that, right? To dissolve the imprints, to dissolve the inner conditioning, right? That might have at its core this idea that, leaders are to have, like a very prim proper experience of their leadership, not experiencing themselves in their utmost juicy selves, right? And so we're being invited into this work just first and foremost so that we may avail to ourselves the opportunity to have the juicy and the delicious relationships that we deserve as human beings, right? Because while we might hold very sacred missions as leaders, right, there's the fact of us being human and also holding as our birthright the opportunity to have beautiful and nourishing relationships, right? Which is usually not the case for a lot of leaders. For a lot of leaders, there is that absence of beautiful relationships, of a beautiful intimacy, of a beautiful love, right? And so we're being invited into this work so that we may heal at a deeper level, right? And avail ourselves to that beautiful intimacy and the beautiful experience of our sexual energy, all right? And we want to couple this with intimacy healing work, right? Which is the very deep and holistic work of healing the intimacy wound, which manifests in various layers, right? So when I was actually reflecting on this, I thought we might actually need a masterclass, maybe just a 1-day masterclass on intimacy healing for leaders, right? And so we're being called into this work because it holds the opportunity for us to attract into your life quality partners, right? And to co-create a union that will support and feed your sacred mission as a leader, all right? And this is actually something that we rarely consider, like just the power of the partners that we engage with in our lives and how that relationship may impact our leadership and our sacred mission as a leader, right? And so through this work, we're availing ourselves to the opportunity to attract quality partnerships in our lives, right? And to attract unions that will actually nourish, that will actually feed, that will actually support our sacred mission, right? And so we're wanting to say goodbye to those olden days where we might find ourselves with partners who don't get us, who don't get our mission, and who don't get the work that we are doing, right? And so we're stepping into times and allowing ourselves to do the inner work to avail ourselves to those quality partnerships, right? Because so our sacred missions as leaders are quite a big deal because we are standing as bridges to the new earth. We are standing at the forefront of the creation process of the new worlds that we say we want, right? And it's also very critical that we have in our lives the support system that will enable that mission to take root in our lives and to actually manifest, right? So that is part of the why of why do we need to be in romantic relationships, or why do we need quality romantic relationships, right? Yes, so there is a huge invitation to consider the value of partnership on your path as a leader, and to also consider the quality of that partnership in your life and on your path as a leader, right? And so we have mentioned sexual healing work, and we're coupling that with intimacy healing work. And these pathways of healing might also need to be supported by inner child work and by mother wound healing and father wound healing, right? And this is with the appreciation that how we show up in relationships is often influenced by our experiences from childhood, right? And our relationships with mom and dad, and whatever pains and whatever joys we might hold in those relationships, right? And so we're wanting to hold space for healing at that level, right? And so it's one that how we show up in relationships is informed by those experiences, and also quite often the relationships that we attract, the partners that we call into our lives, are also often influenced by the experiences that we had in childhood, right? And so we're wanting to heal that. We're wanting to heal the debris or the imprint of any wounding that might have taken place in your childhood that might keep you from drawing in these very nourishing, these high quality partnerships that you might actually deserve and that you might actually need as a resource, as an asset on your path as a leader, right? And so here we're beginning to arrive to the understanding and the appreciation of your relationship with your significant other being an asset, right? There's actually a reason why we as human beings desire romantic intimacy and romantic relationships, right? In the original state of our creation, we are created to be in partnership. And so in stepping into this work of sexual healing, of intimacy healing, we're availing ourselves to the opportunity or the possibility of sacred relationship, of divine union that will actually elevate us in our evolution and in the manifestation of our sacred mission as leaders, right? And this intimacy healing work is a work I offer in my private healing program. Such a juicy work. Of course, we get to go deep into, the inner parts of your psyche, and we also do, other juicy work, to heal at that deep level, right? And in this work of sexual healing and intimacy healing, there's held within that also the important reminder that you can have both an impactful mission work or both an impactful purpose work and a delicious relationship or a delicious marriage, right? I know that oftentimes as purpose-driven individuals or as leaders, we might think that we have to choose between doing our purpose work, doing our badass, impactful leadership work, and having a relationship, right? Or there might also be ideas that you can only have that relationship at a certain time when you have reached certain milestones in your leadership, right? And so through this work, we're also wanting to bust the myth that you can't have both, right? We want to put behind us, like if you consider some of the most prominent like women leaders, let's center women here in our world, right? Most of them are single, right? And when we dig deep into the why, we find some of these wounded ideas around leadership and what it means to be a woman leader, right? And we're wanting to heal those for ourselves so that we may get to experience love, so that we may get to experience delicious relationship and delicious marriage in this lifetime. Please let me know if that might be a desire for you. And please also let me know if that's maybe something that has anchored in your life and whether it's something that you would love to create. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and so in instances where we might feel that a relationship will distract us or will distract you from your purpose work, like we want to go really deep, right, into our inner being to take those beliefs and those stories apart, right, to open them up so we may have a good look at them and also have a good look at their origins, their source, where they are coming from, right, to have a look at what informs the idea that a relationship might distract us from our purpose work, right? And then we want to clear if it's a wounded belief or if it's a wounded story or a distorted story or distorted belief. We want to deeply clear it, right? Working with like the inner child, like we'd want to check whether some of these ideas are coming from like earlier in our childhood or what we might have witnessed happening in our close family space, you know, either what we witnessed unfolding between our mothers and our fathers, right, or other close family members, right, just looking at what happened or what we witnessed through their own relationships and how those relationships impacted them, and therefore then what we might have internalized as being true of intimate relationships, right? So I think we definitely need a masterclass on intimacy healing, right? Yeah. And so I was bringing it here because it is such a beautiful partner to this work on sexual healing, especially for us as leaders, right? Because of these distorted ideas of who we be or who we are supposed to be or what we're supposed to experience or what our lives are supposed to look like as leaders, right? There is an invitation for us to reimagine who we be as leaders and for us to do this deep inner healing work so that we may begin to manifest what is in alignment with our highest selves and our highest incarnations and our highest timelines, right, for ourselves and as individuals and for our lineages, right? Yeah. Okay, so that's just one of why we're being invited into this work of sexual healing, right? So that we may manifest the juicy relationships that we deserve, so that we may manifest the beautiful, the delicious marriage that we deserve. So that we get to be supported, you know, so that we get to be deeply nourished. You know, there is a very beautiful and magical and a divine thing that the right relationship will do for your sacred mission as a leader. And it's a magical and a miraculous thing that you wouldn't be able to do on your own, So for us as leaders who are invested in the birthing and the creation of the new worlds that we say we desire, it is actually important that we land into those sacred relationships that will elevate, that will multiply our efforts and push us even further in our sacred missions and in our work of making manifest this new earth in our world, in our respective fields, in our respective corners of the world. So there's actually a need that we be in sacred relationship. Like, it's not just a no thing, you know? Yeah. But obviously, we do respect and honor where we each are at, but I'd love to present that to you, to all of us here, as a sacred invitation for who we are on the sacred mission of birthing the new worlds that we say we desire for our collective human race. Yeah. Okay. Again, this is a work that I offer in my private healing program, where you'll get to work one-on-one with me for a minimum of 4 months. So we can either work together for 4 months or for 6 months, whichever feels most aligned for you. But the minimum period of work for that program is 4 months, so that we can deeply dive into this work and bring about a real healing for your life, right? Yes. Okay. Let's just take a brief pause. So we just take that in before we shift to the next layer of our conversation today. All right. Okay. So now let's get into this quite specifically. Why leaders are being invited into the sexual healing work, right? And first, I would like to invite us to explore why leaders need to heal quite broadly, or just more generally, right? Why a healing work is needed for us as leaders, why we are being invited to include in the journey and in the unfolding of our leadership space, for us to be doing our inner healing work. It actually feels like something that is a non-negotiable, you know, if we are wanting to grow into the leaders who actually bring about the real impact and the long-lasting change that we say we want for our world. All right? Still honoring our sovereignty, right? Still honoring our urgency to choose. However, there is this invitation for us as leaders to heal. And this is because, one, leaders are human. All right? I know that oftentimes when we consider leaders, we consider them as superhumans who cannot be touched or impacted by the happenings of this world, right? However, we are being invited to step into the understanding that as leaders, we are human, and therefore not immune to the pain, to the trauma, to the conditioning, wounded conditioning that can be sustained by any human being who is born into this world with how it's currently set up and with its most dominant systems. Right? And we're also being invited to heal, because this pain, trauma, and wounded conditioning actually influences how and what we create as leaders. And it also influences how we lead, right? And most importantly, so the pain, the trauma, the wounded conditioning, quite generally, for all human beings, it influences how we create, right? because held within that, like just given our understanding of trauma and conditioning, held within that are our beliefs about ourselves, beliefs about life, beliefs about our very work, stories, vows, inner childhood experiences, inner wounds, inner pains, right? And so we're being invited into this understanding that we create as we are, right? We create from the inner reservoir of our beliefs, of the stories that we hold, of the vows that we hold, of the experiences that we might have had, right? And this is how we create as we are. And this is how the experiences that we have had influence what we create and how we create it, right? And so, most importantly, is this appreciation and the understanding that while everyone is a co-creator of our collective reality, you as a leader stand or sit as a front runner in the creation process of the worlds that we say we want, right? And so this healing work becomes necessary because if our inner pain, if our trauma, if our wounded conditioning is left unattended and unintegrated, they can seep into our very leadership and have the unintended consequence of us recreating that which we say we don't want. Because it's as though we are plugged into the past, into past conditioning, into past ideas of who we be, of how the world is to be, and creating from that place, right? And so this healing work, when we heal, we enable ourselves to be born anew. We enable ourselves to dissolve the imprint of that past pain, of that past wounding. We enable ourselves to birth and to grow new worlds within ourselves, right? And when that happens, like once we birth and we grow these new worlds within ourselves, we literally become an embodiment of these new worlds that we say we want. Once we become born anew, once we dissolve, once we transmute whatever pain we might be holding within us, whatever pain it might be, whatever wounded conditioning it might be, when that happens, and this is the radical nature of inner healing work, like when that happens, there is no way in which we cannot birth these new worlds in the outside world, right? And so with this, we are therefore then being invited into healing as a path of our leadership, healing as an important component of our path as leaders who are on a sacred mission of birthing the new earth, right? So the healing work enables us the inner resources and the inner capacity to build, to birth whatever it is that we might say we want to birth in the world. We shift the old and we bring in the new just by doing our inner healing work. Like, isn't that awesome? Literally, it's like all that we're being called into is to sit. Well, find somebody who can support you in your inner healing work. Sit, do the work, and you're almost assured that the radical work of impact that you want to do in the world will come to fruition. Obviously, it might take time, but it's like that's like an important ingredient in us being able to bring about the changes that we want in the world. right? And all of this healing work is a work I hold space for in all of my 3 healing offers, right? So I'm very happy that we now have spiritual consultation sessions. So beginning this April, you can book a spiritual consultation session with me. It's a 90 minutes online session. You can also still book a private healing session with me, and you can also apply to work with me in my private healing program, right? Yeah. Okay. And lastly, now that we have explored why healing is needed more broadly, let's now get into why sexual healing is needed for leaders. Yeah, quite specifically, right? But before that, I love these pauses. Let's just take a brief pause to take in what's been shared thus far. We're going for the last lap now, which is probably the most important lap. Okay. So, what is the significance of sexual healing work for leaders? One, as we've already explored, just like 5 minutes ago, leaders are human. Like, we're first and foremost human, and therefore, in the realm of sexual healing work, we're not immune to the sexual wound, right? And this is as explored in the 3 classes we had, which explored what the sexual wound is and how to heal that sexual wound, right? And so the sexual healing work is needed for us to heal and transmute the sexual wound and sexual trauma that we might have experienced at various levels of their manifestation, right? And this is especially important for us as leaders because as we heal our own sexual pain and trauma, we begin to embody this as a template. We begin to embody this as a state of being and as a possibility for our collective human race, and especially for the communities that we lead. So we begin to embody as a template the state of being of a healed and a liberated sexuality. And we hold that as a possibility for our communities and for our broader world, right? And this is very powerful when held at a leadership level, right? Because it means that given our positionality in our society and in the communities that we lead, this can then ripple into our communities through our very energetic blueprint, through our very own frequency, and through the different works that we will now have the capacity to hold and to implement in our communities, right? So when we heal the sexual pain and the sexual trauma for ourselves, we hold this as a possibility. We hold this healed state. We hold the state of a wholesome and a liberated sexuality for those that we lead and for broader humanity, right? And we also want to come back to this idea that we create the world as we are, from the inside out. And so if we're wanting to create worlds where if we're wanting to create worlds that are free of violence of this nature, that are free of violence that is connected to our sexual energy and our sexuality, that are free of pain, of sexual pain, that are free of sexual trauma, we first need to do that work internally ourselves and embody that as a lived reality that we can then create for our broader communities. So it literally starts with us as leaders, and especially because we sit within the roles of being the front runners in the creation process of our world, right? So if we're wanting to create worlds that are free of pain around this, we ourselves need to do the inner healing work, our own personal and individual inner healing work around this. Like, this is where the significance of this work is for us as leaders, right? And also because as we heal, we help prepare, and we help elevate the collective template of consciousness around sex, sexuality, and our bodies as humanity. And this is so important and so potent when held at the level of leadership, right? So we have explored in previous classes what's currently happening in our world in terms of matters of sex, sexuality, and our bodies, right? And when we, as individual leaders, heal in these areas, we begin to heal this, we begin to repair this for our world and for our communities. And we also enable ourselves to arrive into positions where we can actually implement ideas, programs, campaigns that will bring about true freedom and liberation for humanity in these matters. So this is an invitation to embodied leadership, where we as leaders embody the changes that we want to bring in the world. So if we're wanting to bring a change that is connected to human beings being free, human beings being free of sexual pain. Actually, the sexual wound is one of the deepest and pervasive wounds in our world. When we look at some of the biggest crimes in the world that are connected to our sexual energy, that are connected to the wombs of women, that are connected to the creational centers, the sacral centers of men, of non-binary beings. And so, of course, that is an area of priority in our world. And there is a sacred invitation for us as leaders to, even if this might not be our area of work, if we're wanting to bring about freedom, liberation in the world, this is one of the key areas that we're called to heal in our individual lives, so that we may hold that energetically as a possibility, as a possible lived experience for all of humanity and for those in our communities, right? And closely linked to that is this invitation for us to arrive towards the understanding that this sexual healing work, when we do it in our individual lives, right, it stands as the number one pathway of solving or of remedying the pain of GBV in our world, right? I know that for years we've been cracking our heads around, oh my God, how do we remedy GBV? And I'd like to present this invitation of the sexual healing work, because GBV is a sexual wound. It's a manifestation of the sexual wound, right? And so if this is something that we're actually serious about remedying, then we also need to get serious about sexual healing work in our individual lives and possibly in our communities as well. Because there is an invitation to bring this work into our communities, in our workspaces, in our organizations, at whatever degrees that might be possible, right? There's an opportunity here for us to begin to have real conversation about what this GBV is and how to heal and how to remedy it, starting at the level of the self. Because it is a pain that affects everyone, or that involves everyone in our collective. It's actually a manifestation of the collective sexual wound, right? And so when we're wanting to remedy that as leaders, there's the invitation for us to be doing that in our work, in our personal lives, as a foundational step, right? So that we may begin to embody this change that we want to see in the world. And there's no way around it. That is actually the shortcut to remedying the pain of GBV in our world, right? And there's also the invitation here that we actually need leaders who bravely meet within themselves this aspect of their being, and who transmute the debris of any wounding so that they may lead in an embodied way, and with the capacity to actually bring about real change in this area, right? And so for us as leaders, we hold this invitation to heal, to do the sexual healing work at an individual level, for us, as individuals, for our personal lives, right? And there's also the invitation for us to do this healing work still in our individual lives, but with the understanding of what it means at a broader and collective level, right? And so, it can't just be talk, right? It can't just be talk that we want to remedy this collective sexual pain or sexual wound in our society. We also need to be doing our individual inner work. That's the invitation, right? And lastly, there's the invitation for us to arrive at the understanding of sexual energy being creational energy. So it is the energy with which we create not only babies, but we create ideas, we create projects, we create organizations, we create governments, right? And this creational energy is closely linked. The health of it is closely linked to the health of our sexual energy, right? The quality of what we create and how we create it is closely linked to the health and the vibrancy of our sexual energy, right? And so as we heal any wounding or any distortion around our sexual energy, we will also restore and return to our organic inner infrastructure of creation. All right? And what that means is that we will return to our original organic cause of creation, to our organic original intelligence of what to create if we're wanting to bring about these new worlds into the world, right? And so this then enables us the capacity to build in alignment with that original intelligence that will bring about the new worlds that we say we want for ourselves as individuals and for the collective human race. Yeah. And so that's the final piece of it. But before we part, I'd like to address a question around, or a possible question around, leaders who might want to extend this work or offer this work to others in their communities, right? Where there might be a recognition that there might be some transgressions happening within your community, either to children or to adults, specifically around the sexual wound, right? And what you could do about that, right? So definitely this work on sexual healing, sexual alchemy, or sexual liberation, I don't know what we would call it. We can literally get our creative juices on in terms of how to creatively name it, right? So it's definitely a work that we can offer in our communities. It could even be work around consent, embodied consent, etc., or the respect and the honoring of the bodies of women, the bodies of children, the bodies of all beings, right? It's definitely a work that we can offer in our communities, right? However way that it might look. And given the conversation that we have just had, there is this invitation for that work to be accompanied by our own inner healing work around this specifically, right? Because what we're seeing in our world is an experience where we are wanting to facilitate a work or changes that we have not yet embodied ourselves, right? And so what we're being invited into is to accompany whatever efforts we might want to facilitate in our communities with this inner work, so that we may offer assistance in areas that we have embodied ourselves. Because once we have embodied the work ourselves, we actually hold greater capacity to bring about those changes in our communities. Yeah? Awesome. Yeah. So that brings us almost to the end of our conversation today. And because this is our final class in the series of sexual alchemy, I would like to just offer a number of possible next steps, right, for you who are interested in this work, right? So this 6-part series has only been a teaching, right? And the healing work that we've been talking about, that we've been exploring, it happens in my containers, right? So we've spoken about womb healing work, body healing work, inner child healing. That work, it's a work that happens in containers, right? Not just through conversation, okay? And so I'd like to invite you into I'd like to invite you into these few next steps, right? One, as mentioned, you could either start by booking a consultation session with me. So this is a 90-minute online session for spiritual guidance and just for a deep dive, to get guidance on the areas that you might need to heal, or that you might need to focus on in your life and in your healing path, right? It actually feels like a great start for anyone who wants to get started on their healing path, and especially maybe if you haven't worked with me before, just for us to do that deep consultation first, to look at what the needs might be, and for me to also offer guidance on the next steps that you might take in your healing path, like what to focus on, what you might need to heal, and what resources you can also lean into to support that healing work, right? And there's also still the opportunity to book like a once-off private healing session with me. This is a 2-hour session, right, where we will focus on the area that you most need to heal. So this one is actually great if you already know what you need to heal. Although even in this session, we'll still do a deep consultation, right? Just to look at what's happening in your life, what's happening in your inner being, right? And then in that session, we will hold healing space for one of the emerging themes, right? Or one of the areas that emerge as requiring a healing, yeah? And lastly, you can also apply to work with me in my private healing program for a minimum of 4 months, right? And very soon, we're also going to have a group healing program, which is so exciting to be bringing forth, right? And lastly, as mentioned, the sexual healing work is a womb healing work or a sacral healing work. It is a body healing work, as we have deeply explored in the past 5 weeks. It is also an ancestral or a generational healing work, starting with your mother and your father, right? And it is also an inner child healing work, right? Given the experiences that you might have encountered while you were still a child, while you were still growing up, right? And it should ideally be a holistic healing work, right? That speaks to the emotional, the spiritual, the psychological, the somatic, right? To speak to all those areas that might have been impacted by the experiences that you had and the source of that which you are seeking to heal, right? And this womb healing work, right? Because like sexual healing is only a part of womb healing work, right? Or rather of womb medicine work. And so this womb healing work, this womb medicine work is a work that we'll now be diving deeply into here on my Instagram page and also via email. So I've recently been feeling guided to teach more specifically directly on the womb. And so that's what we're going to be stepping into in the next few weeks, or just in the next, it feels like in the next teaching season of my work here, right? Of my free offerings. Okay? And this sexual healing work, I trust that we would have come to the understanding of it being part of the big why for this womb healing work, right? Just given how the sexual wound, how sexual trauma impacts the womb space and the creational center. And so while the series is ending, the work doesn't end because there's so much to learn and also a healing work to do around the womb for our lives, which is what I'm going to be sharing on in the next coming few weeks, right? And because I've also been sharing these classes, these teachings on my podcast, I'd also like to just say this for you who might only follow me on my podcast. Please definitely also connect with me on Instagram or join my mailing list, because I suspect I might be going on a podcast break, okay? Because since the beginning of Jan, we've been doing weekly podcasts, and so I suspect that I might need just a creative break on the podcast. And during that time, I know that I'll definitely be sharing teachings via posts on my Instagram and also on email. So definitely connect with me on Instagram, and also you can also join my mailing list at my website dumelomarere.com. And so that marks the completion of our series on sexual alchemy. It's been such a joy and such an honor to convene here with you on a weekly basis to share on this work, and I'm definitely excited about how the fruits of this work will sprout, how the seeds will sprout going forward, and with the opportunity of time. And so until next time, until the next class that we will have, I wish you a beautiful day or a beautiful evening wherever you might be, and also inviting you into great gentleness and deep compassion and love for self. Okay, bye.